The medial two-thirds of the shaft of the clavicle is in which shape? Rounded. Which muscle gets originated from the anterior surface of medial two-thirds of the shaft of the clavicle? Pectoralis major. The lower end of radius and ulna meet the carpal bones and form the joint known as wrist joint. Elbow joint is a type of hinge joint. At which joint the clavicle and scapula articulates with each other? Acromioclavicular joint. A ridge present in the inferior surface of the lateral one-third of the shaft of the clavicle is known as trapezoid ridge. The conoid tubercle and trapezoid ridge give attachment to the conoid and trapezoid part of which ligament? Coracoclavicular ligament. How many tarsal bones are there in our body? 14. The weakest bone in our body is clavicle. The attachment of which ligament is seen in the oval impression on the inferior surface at the medial two-thirds of the shaft of the clavicle? Costoclavicular ligament. How many ends are in a clavicle? 2 ends. The medial end of the clavicle is also known as sternal end. The bone of the arm is humerus. Upper limb is made up of how many parts? 4 parts. How many lumbar vertebrae are there in our body? 5. How many cervical vertebrae are there in our body? 7. How many bones are there in our body? 206. The lateral end of the clavicle is also known as acromial end. How many borders are there in the lateral one-third of the shaft of the clavicle? 2 borders. Which muscle gets originated from the anterior border of lateral one-third of the shaft of the clavicle? Deltoid. Clavicle articulates with the axial skeleton at which joint? Sternoclavicular joint. Which joints permit rotatory movements like pronation and supination of forearm? Radioulnar joints. How many auditory ossicles are there in our body? 6. How many phalanges are there in our body? 28. How many carpal bones are there in our body? 16. The only bone that lies horizontally in our body is clavicle. Trapezius muscle inserted into which border of lateral one-third of the shaft of the clavicle? Posterior border. The only bone in our body have 2 primary centers of ossification is clavicle. Which part of lower limb is homologous to the shoulder girdle of upper limb? Hip girdle. The upper end of radius and ulna meets the lower end of humerus and forms a joint known as elbow joint. Hip joint is a type of ball and socket joint. Which is the largest tarsal bone? Calcaneus. The smallest bone in our body is stapes. The superior surface of the medial two-thirds of the shaft of the clavicle gives origin to which muscle? Head of sternocleidomastoid. Which bone in our body starts ossify first? Clavicle. An elevation present in the inferior surface of the lateral one-third of the shaft of the clavicle is known as conoid tubercle. How many cranial bones are there in our body? 8. Ankle joint of lower limb is homologous to which joint of upper limb? Wrist joint. How many thoracic vertebrae are there in our body? 12. Subclavian groove is present in which surface of the clavicle? Inferior surface. The longest bone in our body is femur. At which joint radius and ulna meet each other? Radio-ulnar joints. The only long bone in our body ossifies in membrane is clavicle. Which bone supports the shoulder so that the arm can swing clearly away from the trunk? Clavicle. Subclavius muscle arises from which part of the clavicle? Subclavian groove.